A charity run by Hull Actor, which supports people with eating disorders, say that they have been inundated with requests for help since opening a new centre in Hull. Gemma Oaten and SEED opened 2 therapy rooms in Princes Quay Shopping Centre a month ago. Some of the first people to get treatment told us that they can see a future now that they've had the help that they needed. Well, Natalie Bell has this report.
People are getting to crisis point before they can access services, but SEED is there to bridge that gap so that early intervention is implemented before people get to crisis point.
A month on from moving into a new home in Hull city centre, and the charity SEED say they're busier than ever before. In just 2 days, 100 referrals came through from people desperate for help. Actress Gemma Oaten runs a charity. It was set up by her mum after Gemma's own struggles.
I was around 10 years old, and from that moment, 13 years of my life gone, nearly dying 4 times. And unfortunately, I didn't get the help that I needed straight away.
Last year was when I first noticed it.
19-year-old Sienna is one of the first to seek treatment in one of 2 new therapy rooms.
October last year, my body started to shut down, and that's when I first reached out for help and thought, I can't live the way I am anymore. It made me feel a bit scared and anxious at the same time, but then it sort of made me feel a bit hurtful because I was actually getting the help that I needed. I just can see a future now.
15-year-old Brooke and her mum Tony have also been coming to the centre.
It just got worse and my weight started to decline very rapidly.
Without SEED, I just don't even want to think where we'd be.
You get advice from everyone, you get that support, and there's a light at the end of the tunnel, you're going to be okay.
The government told us it's providing £54 million per year on eating disorder services for young people and children, but Gemma says more still needs to be done.
1 in 5 will die as a direct result of the eating disorder or by taking their own life. We need to do more.
100 referrals in 2 days. We saw her in Natalie's report, and earlier I spoke to Gemma Oaten just before we came on the air. Gemma, do you think the number of people with an eating disorder is actually going up, or are people just more happy to talk about it now?
I think it's a mixture of both, to be honest, Peter. I think during the pandemic there was a massive increase in eating disorders and disordered eating, and I think it came from a place of, a lot of people need that stability and that consistency and control. And when our worlds were completely turned upside down, that really does give a massive trigger for an eating disorder. But then equally coming out of the pandemic, we've had to readjust again. And it's been a really scary and difficult time for our mental health. But I also think, yes, people are starting to be brave and realise that there's no stigma or shame involved in speaking out about an eating disorder. But whichever way you look at it, there are a massive increase in eating disorders, and we need to address it, and we need to get more funding behind the issue.
It's an interesting one to talk about. Where is the thin line, briefly, between an eating disorder and just being picky about food and worried about putting on weight and counting calories? How does somebody know, in other words, that they've got an actual disorder?
I think actually it's a very good point, Peter, in terms of, I talk about eating disorders and disordered eating. Disordered eating can start at that moment where somebody starts to be a little bit more cautious around food, to be described as a picky eater. Actually, it's those people who are struggling and seeing the warning signs of that actually need help more sooner, so that it doesn't progress into an eating disorder. We're also seeing a massive increase in ARFID, which is avoidant restricted food intake disorder at the moment. And many times people can see somebody who has ARFID, but they just dismiss them as a picky eater. The same with the link between autism and disordered eating. It is a much more complex issue than I think people give it credit for.
Well,
and it needs to be looked into.
We've heard how busy you are at Princes Quay. I mean, it must take a lot of pluck to come in off the street when you've been shopping or whatever and admit that you've got issues with food.
But I think that's why I wanted it to be there, because that is a statement, Peter. I've never ever, even when I was going through it, my eating disorder, I would never have dreamed of seeing an eating disorder support service in a shopping centre. it's important that they feel like they're being seen and heard.
And just very briefly, do you ever get over it? I mean, you mentioned you had an eating disorder when you were younger. Is your relationship now with food normal, whatever normal is?
I think there's always a recovery after recovery. I think it's about learning to have the tools and skill set mentally to be able to keep it in check and to live a life where you thrive and not just survive. And that's what we at SEED believe in.
Interesting one. We could talk about it for a very long time. I think Gemma Oaten, keep up the good work. Thank you for coming on tonight. Most grateful to you.